Hi students, today we'll discuss the next poet and his poetry, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley. He was a major English romantic poet born in 1792 and died in 1822, quite a short span of life. But despite the short span, he has proved to be one of the canonical writers of English poetry. He was born as the eldest son of a wealthy country squire, and right from his childhood he possessed a fierce independence of spirit, and he bitterly hated all forms of tyranny. During his early childhood, he was home tutored by Reverend Evan Edwards, and in the course of his first and only year at Oxford University in England, Shelley and his friend Thomas Jefferson Hogg, they issued a pamphlet which was provocatively titled "The Necessity of Atheism," and for this both students were expelled from the university. And this event intensified Shelley's rebelliousness against accepted notions of law and order. In 1811, he met and married Harriet Westbrook, but then a few years later he developed an affair with Mary Godwin. Mary Godwin was the daughter of the famous political philosopher William Godwin and the feminist activist Mary Wollstonecraft. So Mary Godwin later became Mary Shelley, and she was the author of Frankenstein, which is considered an early example of science fiction. Shelley was a revolutionary and idealist and a dedicated seeker of an ideal world where love and brotherhood of man would prevail. And you see that his poetry expresses his spirit of rebellion, his love of man and of freedom as well. And what makes him a great poet is the sheer music and matchless spontaneity of his verse. Some of his most famous poetic works include Ozymandias, Ode to the West Wind, Ode to a Skylark, Queen Mab, Adonai, then Cenci and Prometheus Unbound are his verse dramas. Shelley became in fact the idol of the next 2 or 3 generations of poets, including major Victorian and pre-Raphaelite poets like Robert Browning, Alfred Tennyson, Rossetti, William Butler Yeats, etc. Shelley's intense feelings about beauty, freedom, and expression are documented in poems such as Ode to the West Wind and To a Skylark. And he has also written an important essay called A Defense of Poetry, which contains his aesthetic philosophy, and he argues in that essay that poetry brings about moral good. According to Shelley, the figure of the poet is not that of a simple, talented entertainer, but he considers the poet as a grand prophetic hero. And the poet has the power or the duty to translate the truths of nature, the truth of life, through the use of his imagination, and he translates these truths into poetry. Thus, he considers that poetry is a kind of prophecy, and through his words, the poet has the ability to change the world for the better. He has the ability to bring about political, social, and spiritual change. So, according to him, a poet is like a savior, like the famous Prometheus, who stole the fire and gave it to the humans, or like Jesus Christ. The poet saves and guides the humans towards better prospects. However, this great poet was drowned during a storm in 1822. He was just 29 years old then. He sailed in a new boat called Don Juan, and the boat sank due to a severe storm. And Shelley's badly decomposed body washed ashore 10 days later, and it was cremated in Rome. And when Shelley's body was cremated, his unusually small heart resisted burning, and his heart was preserved for some time by his wife, and later that was also buried at St. Peter's Church. So that is the biography of the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. Now let's look at his poem, To the Skylark. To a Skylark, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest like a cloud of fire. The blue deep thou wingest, and singing all dost soar, and soaring ever singest in the golden lightning of the sunken sun, over which clouds are brightening. Thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. The pale purple even melts around thy flight like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Keen as are the arrows of that silver sphere, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear. Until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. All the earth and air with thy voice is loved, as when night is bare. From one lonely cloud the moon rains out her beams, and heaven is overflowed. What thou art we know not, what is more like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers a rain of melody. Like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden till the world is wrought, to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. Like a high-born maiden in a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in secret hour, with music sweet as love which overflows her bower. Like a glowworm golden in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden its aerial hue among the flowers and grass which screen it from the view. Like a rose embowered in its own green leaves, by warm winds deflowered till the scent it gives makes faint with too much sweet those heavy-winged thieves. Sound of vernal showers on the twinkling grass, rain awake and flowers all that ever was. Joyous and clear and fresh thy music doth surpass. Teach us pride, O bird, what sweet thoughts are thine. I have never heard praise of love or wine that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. Chorus hymeneal or triumphal chant match with thine would be all, but an empty want, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. What objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields, or waves, or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? With thy clear keen joyance, languor cannot be. Shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but never knew love's sad satiety. Waking or asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. Or how could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? We look before and after, and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell us of saddest thoughts. Yet, if we could scorn, hate, and pride, and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet were, thou scorner of the ground. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know, such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. Okay, now let's look at the poem a bit more closely. The poem was written in 1820 and it was based on an actual experience. Shelley actually wrote this poem to a skylark after hearing a bird's distinctive calls while he was walking through the port city of Livorno, 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 Italy. So that was what inspired him to create this masterpiece. And you see that this poem is structured in the form of an ode. And an ode is a type of lyrical poem which is written to address and praise someone or something. This poem comprises of 21 stanzas of 5 lines each. Altogether there are 105 lines. And the rhyme pattern of the stanza is A, B, A, B, B. And as we analyze the poem closely, we see that the poet is comparing the bird to a yawned star, the planet Venus. He compares the bird to a maiden, to a poet, to a rose flower, and even to a worm. Okay, so now let's look at this poem and see how it remains as a quintessential example of romantic poetry. So let's read the poem closely. To a Skylark, Percy by Shelley. Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. So the opening is a joyful shout by the poet. The poet is calling out to the bird. He is greeting the poet, hail to thee, and he calls it blithe spirit. Blithe means happy, cheerful. Shelley feels that it is no ordinary bird. That is why he calls it a blithe spirit. You are a happy spirit. You are a divine entity. Something more than flesh, blood, and feather. That very first line is a symbol of spiritual upliftment. Then he says, bird, thou never wert. The poet goes on to explain that the skylark was never really a bird. Rather, the skylark is a creature from heaven, or at least near heaven. And that's why he says, bird, thou never wert, that from heaven or near it pourest thy full heart in profuse strains of unpremeditated art. And so the bird hails from either heaven or from somewhere near heaven, and from there the skylark is spontaneously pouring out its emotions in the form of beautiful music. For the poet, the bird as well as its song comes from heaven. It seems so divine. Pourest thy full heart. The bird's song comes from its heart, and it comes in profuse strains. Profuse strains means it is flowing like a river. The music is flowing uninterrupted. So we hear the spontaneous flow of music from the heart of that bird. Next stanza. Higher still and higher from the earth thou springest, like a cloud of fire. The deep blue thou wingest, and singing still doth soar, and soaring ever singest. And the second stanza he says, the bird continues to soar higher and higher. It is rising higher and higher from the earth, which reminds the speaker of billowing flames. So the bird is rising higher and higher from the earth like a cloud of fire, and the bird glides throughout the vast blue sky, and it is flying as it sings, and it is singing as it flies. So the poet feels that the bird is rising from the earth towards heaven, and it keeps moving higher and higher. And in the third line he uses a simile. He describes the bird as a spirit, and it is comparing it to a cloud of fire. Now, as the bird is flying higher and higher, all the while it is also singing. So the stanza captures the joy and freedom of the bird. It is singing, and it is soaring, and it is again singing. Okay. Stanza 3. In the golden lightning of the sunken sun, over which clouds are brightening, thou dost float and run, like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. So the time is sunset. As the sun begins to set, it gives off a golden light that illuminates the surrounding clouds. And then he finds that thou dost float and run like an unbodied joy whose race is just begun. So he feels that the bird drifts about the sky as if it is like an unbodied form of happiness. That again speaks about the freedom and pleasure of movement that the poet enjoys. Its flight is like floating. It is pure. It is easy. And the unbodied joy of the skylark, that means it is full of energy and freshness, full of possibilities and a new beginning. So the bird is just enjoying its freedom. That is what the poet feels like. Stanza 4. The pale purple even melts around thy flight like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill delight. Pale purple even. Even means evening. Here the poet says that the way the skylark flies in the sky, now it feels as if even the evening has turned pale purple, because that is how beautiful the bird is. And pale purple, it is an alliteration. Alliteration means the repetition of identical consonant sounds in successive syllables. Here pale purple, per. And then he compares the bird to a star, like a star of heaven in the broad daylight. Thou art unseen, but yet I hear thy shrill of delight. So we know that at night we can see the stars, but at broad daylight a star is not visible. So the skylark is also like a bright star in the sky that cannot be seen during the day. And the speaker says he cannot see the bird, but still it can hear that high-pitched song of that bird. Stanza 5. Keen as are the arrows of that silver sphere, whose intense lamp narrows in the white dawn clear, until we hardly see, we feel that it is there. Silver sphere means moon. So the speaker feels that the skylark's song is as bright and piercing like arrows of the rays of the moon. It is as bright and piercing as moonbeams. So here also he uses a metaphor. He compares the sound of the bird to the piercing arrows. It is so keen, it is so sharp. So just like the rays or beams of light that come from the silver sky, the voice of the bird is also compared to arrows that are keen and sharp. Some say that the silver sphere can also be the morning star Venus. That glow of the morning star narrows when the sky gets bright. So just as we told in the previous passage, the star is invisible during daytime. So the morning star Venus was visible at dawn, but as the sky became brighter, it became invisible. We can hardly see it. So the bird is also like that. Even though we can hardly see that bird because it is soaring high and high, we feel that it is there. We know that it is there because of the voice of that bird. The voice is as sharp as the arrows. So it can be heard. The presence of the bird can be felt. Stanza 6. All the earth and air with thy voice is loved, as when night is bare from one lonely cloud, the moon rains out her beams and heaven is overflowed. So the earth and the air is filled with your voice. So he says, the poet seems to be absorbed and captivated by the sound of the bird, which seems to fill up the whole world all day and all night. It's like the moonlight spreads through the clouds. Even the light seems to touch the heavens. In the same way, the bird's song is also so overpowering that the entire universe is covered by it. Stanza 7. What thou art we know not. What is more like thee? From rainbow clouds there flow not. Drops so bright to see, as from thy presence showers a rain of melody. The poet says that as human beings, we truly don't understand the power of the skylark. And the song of the skylark is so amazing, so mysterious, that we cannot find any comparison. And then he attempts to compare the bird's song with the raindrops coming from the rainbow cloud. But then he goes on to say that compared to the bird's song, even that is nothing. He feels that the song of the bird, which he calls the rain of melody, he feels that it is better than the actual rain, because the actual rain is not as bright or colorful or as melodious as the song of that skylark. Stanza 8. Like a poet hidden in the light of thought, singing hymns unbidden till the world is wrought, to sympathy with hopes and fears it heeded not. Next he compares the skylark to a poet. So the skylark is like a poet enveloped in deep thought, singing hymns unbidden. That means just like a poet who writes the words that comes to his mind uninvited. It is brought about by pure creative instinct. And there are so many things going on around us. There are hopes, fears, agonies, joys, sorrows, etc. And people are not aware of what is going around them. So it is through the poet that one comes to know about the world. We understand the joys and sorrows around us through the poet, through the words or through the poems, through the lyrics of the poet. So just like that, the Skylark is also giving us or teaching us about the hopes and fears and experiences and all those emotions and feelings. So it is like a poet. Stanza 9. Like a high-born maiden in a palace tower, soothing her love-laden soul in secret hour, with music sweet as love, which overflows her bower. Next, the speaker compares the Skylark to a high-born maiden, that means to an aristocratic young woman who secretly sings from the tower of her castle to comfort her soul, which is burdened by love. And her songs are as delightful as love itself, and they fill her chamber. So now the Skylark is compared to a maiden, to a beautiful woman, a woman who is in love. And so she is disclosing the secret of her soul, the secret of her soul through her music. She's finding comfort in music, and her music is filling her bower. Bower means her room. Stanza 10. Like a glowworm golden in a dell of dew, scattering unbeholden its aerial hue among the flowers and grass which screen it from the view. Next, the Skylark is likened to a radiant glowworm in a small dew-covered valley. Now, unbeholden means when nobody is watching. So, without anybody noticing or without anybody telling it to do so, the glowworm distributes its glowing light among the plants and the grass and the flowers and everything. So when everything is dark, it is the glowworm which distributes light. So just like at night we see stars on the sky, at night among the grass and flowers we can also see this glowworm. So from an aerial view, it looks like stars are scattered below. So just like a glowworm distributes light and evades darkness, the music of the Skylark is also erasing all the darkness and sadness around. Stanza 11. Like a rose embowered in its own green leaves, by warm winds deflowered till the scent it gives, makes faint with too much sweet those heavy-winged thieves. Next, the speaker likens the Skylark to a rose that is sheltered by its own leaves. He compares the Skylark to a hidden natural beauty, that is the rose flower. The flower's loveliness is cradled and covered by its leaves. So, just like the sweet scent of that beautiful flower reaches the people who cannot see the flower, just like that, the beauty of the Skylark reaches in the form of its song. Here, the author personifies the winds as thieves. The thieves steal the scent of the rose flower. Just like that, it is the music of the Skylark, a Skylark song that reaches us before the sight of that bird itself. Okay. Stanza 12. Sound of vernal showers on the twinkling grass, rain awakened flowers, all that ever was, joyous and clear and fresh thy music doth surpass. Here the speaker goes on to list all the pleasant sounds and sights that we find in nature. He's comparing all that to the Skylark song. The sound of rain falling on springtime grass, the sight of flowers waking up in the rain, and all the other beautiful aspects of nature, the glowworms, the flowers, the raindrops. So he says that the song of the skylark is better than all these beautiful things in nature. Stanza 13. Teach us, sprite or bird, what sweet thoughts are thine, I have never heard, praise of love or wine, that panted forth a flood of rapture so divine. So the poet is still unsure whether the skylark is more of a bird or a fairy. And he is asking the skylark to educate humankind about its pure, delightful thoughts. Sprite means a fairy. The speaker wants to know what thoughts are behind this beautiful singing. He thinks of the bird as an artist and he wants to know its secrets. The poet says that I have gone through poems that praise love or wine, but in all those poems, he has never heard anything so full of joy and rapture as the song of the skylark. The skylark song is always overflowing and it is flooded with happiness, with love, etc. So here again we see that the poet is overwhelmed by the singing of the bird. Stanza 14. Chorus hymeneal or triumphal chant matched with thine would be all, but an empty want, a thing wherein we feel there is some hidden want. Chorus hymeneal means a poem or a song for a wedding. Hymen was the Greek god of marriage. And a triumphal chant means a song that is written to celebrate victory. So as far as the poet is concerned, all human poetry, be it a hymeneal or a triumphant song, it does not stand up to the skylark's music. In comparison, he feels that all other poetry would seem like meaningless boasting. That's what he means by an empty want. And those empty, boastful songs would make us feel like something is missing compared to the skylark's incredible melody, incredible music. Stanza 15. What objects are the fountains of thy happy strain? What fields or waves or mountains? What shapes of sky or plain? What love of thine own kind? What ignorance of pain? So the speaker wonders about the sources of inspiration behind the music of the skylark, and he is asking the bird, what objects have been the source of your joyous melodies? Is it the land? Is it the body of water? Is it the mountain ranges? Is it the sky or the plains? Is it your love for other larks? Or is it your unfamiliarity with suffering? So what is the source of this beautiful music? And stanza 16. With thy clear, keen joyance, languor cannot be. Shadow of annoyance never came near thee. Thou lovest, but never knew love's sad satiety. So when the poet hears the clear, intense happiness of the skylark song, he feels that the bird has not tasted languor. Languor means sadness. Or it has known any sort of annoyance or irritation. He also concludes that the skylark definitely knows love, but it doesn't seem to have experienced the sadness that love can bring about. Okay. So in the speaker's mind, the bird is so perfectly happy and it has not tasted sorrow of any kind. Stanza 17. Waking you're asleep, thou of death must deem things more true and deep than we mortals dream. Or how could thy notes flow in such a crystal stream? Then suddenly we see that things take a mysterious turn. The speaker imagines that somewhere in its dreams or in its waking life, the skylark can see and understand. Understand, that is deem. It can see and understand things about the true nature of death. This means that the poet thinks of the skylark as more of an immortal spirit, a supernatural being, which can see beyond even the dreams of mortals, of human beings. It can understand the deep truth about death. So the skylark seems to be more deep and insightful than human beings. And the poet wonders what else could explain how the skylark's music flows with such beauty and clarity. So it is not an ordinary bird, it is a supernatural being that can understand and go beyond the capacity or the capabilities of mere human beings. Stanza 18. We look before and after and pine for what is not. Our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of our saddest thought. So the poet elaborates on the difference between human concerns and those of the skylark. We human beings, we just look at the past and at the future, and we cry over what we don't have. And furthermore, even the most genuine human laughter contains some degree of pain or suffering, and the most pleasant songs that people compose that also expresses their miseries. So the skylark is not like that. We humans, we desperately pine for what we once had and what we cannot yet have. But the skylark is not like that. It lives in the present. It's happy with what it presently has. So here the poet uses the song of the skylark and he also describes the human condition. He says, even when a person is happy, he is at the same time sad over many other things. And also, under all that grim sadness, there is also a kind of beautiful truth. So, sadness and beauty cannot be separated for humans. And all our sweetest songs are those that are filled with pain, with sadness, etc. But unlike the pure spirit of the skylark, it is always singing and it is always happy. So 19. Yet, if we could scorn hate and pride and fear, if we were things born not to shed a tear, I know not how thy joy we ever should come near. So the poet goes on to invoke us to think, what would it be like to live without human emotions? Or what would it be like to be less human, less mortal, and more like the skylark? Or what if we could ignore or get rid of or scorn the feelings like hate, pride, and fear? Because these are the feelings that make us so unhappy. And what if we were born without any feelings of pain or sorrow? Or what if we didn't have to cry? So he still believes that even if there was no pain in our lives, then also we could not be able to reach the joy of the skylark or never sing like the skylark. But at the end, he also tries to suggest that maybe it's because we feel the pain and sorrow that we are also able to feel real joy. Because we know pain and sorrow, we are able to enjoy the joy of the bird's music. Okay. Stanza 20. Better than all measures of delightful sound, better than all treasures that in books are found, thy skill to poet where, thou scorner of the ground. The poet once again says that the Skylark song is better than all the human music or all the measures in the world. We can plan and make delightful music, but still it cannot stack up to the music of the Skylark, because its music is ultimate and there is no comparison. He says that even books don't match all the poems and ideas and novels that we have stored up, all the treasures of knowledge that we have stacked up in our mind. They don't match the Skylark's song. And a little bird can make music beyond the human capacity. And the simple song of the Skylark is more wonderful than even the best human poem. Stanza 21, the last and final stanza. Teach me half the gladness that thy brain must know. Such harmonious madness from my lips would flow. The world should listen then, as I am listening now. Now that the poet understands that he cannot match up to the Skylark's pure music or beauty, and the speaker now asks the Skylark to teach him. He wants just a piece, just half of the happiness that he figures the bird feels. If he knew the bird's happiness, he would be able to speak of the harmonious madness or the harmonious music that the bird sings. So this is his one final plea to the Skylark, asking the bird to share half the knowledge of happiness that it has. The speaker believes that by gaining such knowledge, he could create melodious chaos to spill from the speaker's mouth. Furthermore, the speaker believes that the humankind would listen to such verses just as the speaker listens to the Skylark. So here, harmonious madness, that is a key phrase. That is an oxymoron, opposites. Usually we know that harmony and madness are contradictions, but here the speaker puts both together. And an oxymoron is a figure of speech that puts together two seemingly contradictory words or phrases that actually end up making a whole lot of sense. So the speaker is trying to imagine a kind of song, a kind of poem that would push beyond the normal human limits, and that will allow him to feel and write and sing as purely as a Skylark. So altogether, this poem to a Skylark is about a man's search for happiness, because only when you are happy, you will be able to create great art. Here the Skylark seems to be free from all the worries and sadness of life, and it is this immense happiness that awakens the beautiful divine music in that bird. So that's the poem. Thank you.